So I started sharing my screen, and what we'll do is we'll very quickly recap what we learned in our earlier class and then move ahead with the syllabus. Okay.
Making
Okay, can you mute yourself? I think some of you are unmute by mistake. Please mute yourself. All right. Okay. So we saw that the fundamental, apart from the very initial facts about electrostatics, we later saw that the fundamental problem in electromagnetism was to find out the force that some electric charges exert on another charge. Now these charges that are exerting the force are called the source charges.
Your screen.
You can't see my screen. No one can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am, we can't see.
Oh, just a second.
It's
Ma'am.
totally black.
Ma'am is
Okay,
visible.
then how many of you can see the screen? And I mean, if there are people who can see the screen, because I can see the red border, so if there are people who can see the screen, then those who can't, you might have some network problem, because I can see the red border means that the screen is being shared. So if you can't see, then I think you can leave and join again, because there might be some network problem. Okay. All right. Okay, so we saw that the fundamental problem in electromagnetism is the fact that we have to find out the force that some charges that are called source charges exert on another charge called the test charge. Okay, and we saw that when these source charges are stationary, we call it electrostatics. When charges move, you know that there's a current associated with it, and then magnetism comes in and more complications come in. So in our present module, we will be studying the case when these source charges are stationary. Okay, so the fundamental law of electrostatics is Coulomb's law, and we know that the force acting on a test charge due to a single source charge is given by this. So basically, Coulomb's law tells us that force is directly proportional to the product of the charges and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. And this force acts along the line joining the two charges. Okay, so all this we discussed in detail, where r is the separation vector and k is the proportionality constant. So in this way, this is a more general form of Coulomb's law. Okay, so where we have given the relative vector, so basically we have now a vectorial representation, and finally we will give the actual vector representation with respect to a certain origin. So whenever we are representing the position vector of a point at which one of our charges reside, we have to give it with respect to some origin. All right. So if r1 is the position vector of q1 and r2 is the position vector of q2 with respect to some origin O, then this is the line joining them, and this is the direction from q1 to q2. Okay, so if you are calculating the force on q, please mute yourself. It creates a disturbance if there is a noise while I am talking. Okay, so if we want to calculate the force exerted on q2 due to q1, then this is how we will calculate it. F21 we will call it, force on q2 due to q1. On the other hand, if we want to get the force exerted on q1 due to q2, we just change the subscripts, and so we will get the force that is acting on q1 due to q2. So F12, and we'll see that it is just opposite in direction to F21. Okay, and from this expression it becomes clear why when two charges are of the same sign, there is a repulsion between them, because when Q1 and Q2 are of the same sign, then F21 is in the direction of R21. So from this picture, the direction of R21, you can see that there is the force will also act in this direction. So basically it will try to pull the charges apart, and that is repulsion. Whereas when Q1 and Q2 are of opposite signs, so then F21 will be minus R21, so it will be acting in this direction. So it will be acting from Q2 towards Q1, so it will be in a direction such that it's trying to bring the charges together, close together, and so there is attraction. Okay, so this expression of Coulomb's law in the vectorial form also clearly states why like charges repel and opposite charges attract. Okay, so then okay, so these were certain points to note which I will not repeat. Found out what the value of the constant K is in the CGS and the MKS unit, and I told you that this is one value that we will require several times while doing problems, and at least kappa equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught, this expression you need to remember. Okay, so these are the three things that I highlighted, and I told you that these are the three things that we need to remember for our future problems. And then there was the principle of superposition, which again I think I told you in great detail. We discussed it in quite detail, that the net force acting on a particle is the vector sum of the individual forces acting on it. Now, why am I repeating all this? Because today the thing that we are going to study, that is electric field, for that we will require the knowledge of all this. So I am just trying to recapitulate what we did so that there is no gap in your understanding. So principle of superposition, just a second, can you give me a second? I'll just be back. Okay, just give me a second. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back and we'll continue. So the principle of superposition basically says, generally for any kind of force, that the net force acting on a particle is the vector sum of the individual forces acting on it. Okay, and in this case, that is in case of electrostatics, where we are dealing with charges, then we can sort of reframe the principle of superposition in this manner. The interaction between two charges is completely unaffected by the presence of other charges. Okay, so that we can perform the vector addition. So basically, if you have charges Q1, Q2, Q3, etc., and F1 is the force on Q, the test charge due to Q1, F2 is the force on Q due to Q2, and so on, then the resultant force is the vector sum of the individual forces. Okay, pictorially, so suppose Q1 acts on Q3, so F31 is the force, and again Q2 acts on Q3 and F23 is 32 is the force. So the net force will be the vector sum of F32 and F31. Okay, so this is how we apply the principle of superposition in case of electrostatics. So if this is the picture, using Coulomb's law, the expression of F31 is this KQ1 Q3 by R31 square R31 cap. Again, the force of on Q3 due to Q2 is F32, and F32 expression from Coulomb's law is this. So the final expression of the force acting on Q3 when Q1 and Q2 are simultaneously exerting a force on Q3 is given by the sum of the above two forces. Okay, so if there are n source charges affecting the jth test charge, then the net force on Qj is obtained by using this expression. Okay, you can see that Q3, right, the test charge is common in all the terms because that is the charge on which the source charges are exerting the force on. So that will come out, the constant kappa will come out, which is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught, and inside you have the vector sum of Q1 by R31 square R31 cap, Q2 by R32 square R32 cap, plus say Q3 by R33 square R33 cap. In this manner, obviously I not equal to J because the jth charge cannot exert force on itself, so that you have to leave out. Otherwise, if you do this summation, then you will get the net force acting on a test charge by several source charges, namely n source charges. Okay, so we left at this and we'll pick up from here for today's class. Now, what we'll start with today is different types of charge distributions. Now, what do we mean by charge distributions? See, if you consider the summations or the laws, that the forces that we were considering in our previous discussions, we were talking about single charges, Q1, Q2, Q3, etc., acting on a single test charge Q. So we were talking about discrete charges, individual charges, right? So any amount of charge is a multiple of the electronic charge, right? The smallest possible charge available that can be isolated is the electron. You know, we cannot take out a proton from atom. So the smallest possible charge available is an electron, and its charge is 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 coulomb. So any amount of charge that we talk about will be a multiple of the electronic charge. Okay, there may be 2 electrons, there may be 100 electrons, there may be 1000 electrons, but the charge is always in multiples of the electronic charge. Now, if you think about macroscopic charge collections, okay, collections of charge, you are looking at it macroscopically, then usually it's a very large number of electrons, because you can see that the charge on one single electron is 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 coulomb. So even if you want 1 coulomb of electronic charge, you will require of the order of 10 to the power 19 electrons, right? So you can easily understand that whenever we are talking about a few coulombs of charges, we are usually talking about a very, very large number of electrons. Okay, so such collections of discrete charges, say 10 to the power 10 electrons, all right, it's not possible to take the sum of so many charges. If you are, for example, applying the principle of superposition, if you want to find the resultant force due to all such charges, it is not possible to make a summation of 10 to the power 19 charges. So what do? We replace the discrete charges by continuous charge density functions. Okay, so we switch over from discrete point charges to continuous charge distributions, and this is what we learn now. How many kinds of such charge distributions are existing? Okay, the first example is when the charge is spread out over a line. For example, suppose this is a wire. Okay, just think of an insulated wire, and it contains some charges. Some charge is distributed on this insulated wire, not current. It's not, the charges are not moving. There is no potential difference. These are just charges residing, and they are spread out evenly on the wire. Okay. If you consider a very small segment delta L of this wire, which contains an amount of charge delta Q. Now whenever I say delta L or delta Q, you understand from your knowledge of calculus that I am talking about differential amounts, very small infinitesimal amounts. So suppose this is a line segment delta L on this wire, which contains an amount of charge delta Q. Then the linear charge distribution is defined like this. The linear charge distribution lambda is defined as limit delta L tends to 0, that is when delta L is very small, limit delta L tends to 0, delta Q by delta L. Okay. So this is how we define the linear charge distribution. Obviously, from this you can write lambda equal to dq dl. You know from the definition of derivatives that limit delta L tends to 0, delta Q by delta L is dq dl. So dq is equal to lambda dl. So in order to get the charge, what will you have to do? You will have to integrate. dq, the charge for a small element dl, is given by lambda dl. So the total charge will be obtained by integrating lambda dl. Okay, from say L1 to L2, where L1 and L2 are the limits of this wire. So this is what is meant by charge distribution, and the first type is linear charge distribution, denoted by the symbol lambda. Next, let us consider when the charge is mirrored over a surface. Okay, so first we consider the linear case. Now we will consider a surface over which the charge is mirrored. Okay, this is, for example, a surface, arbitrarily shaped surface, and on this we have charges evenly smeared on the surface, again not moving, all static. And then let us suppose that the charge contained on an area element delta S be delta Q. So since we are considering a surface, we now have to consider an area element, no longer a line. So suppose this is an area element delta S, and the charge on this small area element delta S is delta Q. Okay, so again, since I am writing delta S and delta Q, you can understand that I am talking about infinitesimal amounts, very small amounts, close to 0. And then the surface charge distribution is defined as sigma equal to limit delta S tends to 0, delta Q by delta S, or this will be equal to dq ds. So we can write the total charge on this area, this total surface. If you consider the total area of this arbitrarily shaped surface, then the total charge will be obtained by integrating this quantity. dq is equal to sigma ds. Okay. Next form of charge distribution, the surface charge distribution. And the third form, I think you can predict by now what the third form of charge distribution will be. Can anyone tell me? We have done linear and surface. What will be the third form of charge distribution? After linear and surface? Absolutely, volume. So next, we will consider that the charge fills up a volume. Okay. So we saw what happens for a line, for a surface, and now we consider that the charge fills up a volume. I could not draw a three-dimensional picture. You have to imagine that this is a rectangular shaped volume. It can be any arbitrary volume, a spherical volume, or not a regular shape at all. Okay, just a volume. And the charge contained in a volume element delta V is delta Q. So consider a volume element delta V within this cubical volume element. You know, in the Cartesian system, volume element will be given by dx, dy, dz. Okay. So the volume element delta V contains charge delta Q. Again, infinitesimal quantities. So the volume charge distribution or volume charge density is defined as rho equal to limit delta V tends to 0 delta Q by delta V. Okay. So dq in this case is equal to rho dV, and if you want to find the total charge contained in this volume, then you have to integrate rho dV. Okay. So three kinds of charge distributions: linear charge distribution, surface charge distribution, and volume charge distribution. And if you remember, when we were doing vector analysis, we studied three kinds of integration: line integration, surface integration, and volume integration. So this is why you were taught the three kinds of integration, because you might have to find the total charge on a linear distribution, or for a surface distribution, or for a volume distribution. Okay. Lambda will give you linear charge density, sigma will give you surface charge density, and rho will give you volume charge density. So these are the three symbols that you need to remember. Whenever in a problem you see the symbol lambda, you have to understand it is linear. Sigma means surface and rho means volume. Okay. Now remember that all three, lambda, sigma, and rho, are point function, which means they are functions of the position coordinate. They will always be functions of the position coordinate r. Okay. Now, if we have a continuous charge distribution, then we have to switch from summation to integration, right? So remember, if in our principle of superposition, when we were finding out how to find the resultant of several charges acting on a single charge, we had used summation. We summed up we performed the vector sum of all the forces that act individually on the charge. But now that we are switching from discrete to continuous, we have to switch from summation to integration. So we have to learn a new way of writing the principle of superposition. So if we have a test charge Q located at a position R, then the force due to different kinds of charge distribution will be given by this. Okay, we have a test charge Q, and surrounding it you have a linear distribution, you have a surface distribution, you have a volume distribution. So how will I find out the total force on the charge Q, on the test charge Q? We have just replaced the summations by integrations. Okay, see, this was our expression for the resultant force on the jth charge due to n charges, n source charges, right? We had summation. So what have we done? So this was the Qi's, were the different discrete charges which were exerting their forces on the test charge Qj. So what have we done? We have replaced the Qi's by the distributions. Lambda dl for linear distributions, sigma ds for surface distributions, and rho dv for volume distributions. And we have replaced the summation by these integrations. Okay, so the discrete charges are replaced by the respective distributions. So if there is just the linear distribution that is acting on the test charge, then you don't have to bother about these two integrals. You just need to keep this. And similarly, for if there is only a surface distribution, surface charge that is acting, then you don't have to bother about linear and volume. But this is the general expression when all kinds of distribution are exerting a force on a test charge. All right. And what we have done, since we are no longer considering discrete charges, we have replaced the summation symbol by the integration. So instead of summing up discrete forces, we will integrate over the charge distributions. All right. Is this clear to everybody? The switch over from discrete to continuous. Okay. So depending on the problem, if you are given a problem where there are discrete charges, then you will sum up. If you are given a problem where you are given a continuous charge distribution, then you will integrate. Okay. So depending on the problem, you will use the formula accordingly. Just remember, this is just a point to note for your information, that a point charge can be represented by a continuous charge distribution using a Dirac delta function. Okay, now I hope all of you know the Dirac delta function is the mathematical function which has a certain value only at one point in space and is zero at all other points in space. Okay, so even a single point charge you can represent as a distribution using the Dirac delta function. How? So rho r, volume charge distribution, is 0 for all positions r not equal to r0. So if you integrate rho r dv, then its value is q at r equal to r0. So this is the Dirac delta function, delta r minus r0. Okay, it is equal to 1 at r equal to r0 and it is equal to 0 at all values of r not equal to r0. So this expression gives you q, the value of the point charge. Okay, where rho r is a charge distribution that is 0 everywhere except r equal to r0, and there its total charge is q. So this is just for your information that even if you use continuous function, you can use it to represent a discrete single charge by using the Dirac delta function. This is just for the interest of those who are well interested. Okay. Now that you know about the principle of superposition and the different kinds of charge distributions, we will now move over to the electric field. Now, all of you have come across this term in your high school physics. You know what an electric field is, you know what a magnetic field is. Basically, since the force, the Coulomb force or the magnetic force, you know that it is an inverse square law. That is, the force, the magnitude of the force decreases as you move away from the source, right? As 1 by r squared. So this kind of force, basically then you have a certain region in which you will feel the effect of the force. So that region in which the effect of the force is felt is called the field due to that particular force. Okay, so that's a very qualitative way of stating what an electric field is. By definition, suppose you have several point charges q1, q2, q3, q4, etc. up to qn at distances q1, r1, r2, r3, etc. up to rn from a single charge capital Q. Alright. Now, if you use the principle of superposition, then the total force on capital Q due to all these n charges is obtained by summing up vector sum of all the forces due to q1, q2, q3, etc. So, F, the total force acting on Q, is obtained by writing down the individual expressions of the forces. So if you take out the constant 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught, then what do you have? Due to the first charge, it's Q1 Q by R1 square R1. Due to the second charge, it's Q2 Q by R2 square R2. Due to the third charge, it's Q3 Q by R3 vector, etc. So now you can see that you can actually take capital Q outside. That is the source test charge you can take outside. So F is capital Q by 4 pi epsilon naught, and inside you have the source charges Q1 by R1 square R1 cap, Q2 by R2 square R2 cap, etc. So you can write this summation F equal to Q by 4 pi epsilon naught summation I equal to 1 to n Qi by R2 Ri square Ri cap, right? This is the general expression which when you write I equal to 1, 2, 3, etc., you will get these individual expressions. So we can write force equal to capital Q multiplied by the vector E, capital E vector. Okay, where what is capital E vector? Capital E vector is this: the sum of the forces exerted by all the individual source charges gives you the total force acting on the test charge Q. And we can write the total force as Q into some vector E, where E is this expression over here. This is called the electric field of the source charges. So if you have just one source charge, it will be Q by 4 pi epsilon naught R square R vector. Okay, but if you have more than one source charges, then you will have to sum up this expression to get the resultant field due to all the source charges. You can see that since the different source charges have different position vectors, so the electric field E is a vector that varies from point to point and depends on the configuration of the source charges. So what do we mean by depends on the configuration of the source charges? It means that it depends on the positions of the source charges, because each has a different position. So depending on the position of a particular source charge, the total value of E will vary. Okay, so it is a function of R, varies from point to point, and depends on the configuration of the source charges. And physically, E is the force per unit charge. You can see from this expression, E is equal to F by Q. So basically, it is the force per unit charge that could be exerted on a test charge placed at that point. So E gives you the magnitude of the force per unit charge. How much force will be exerted if a unit test charge is brought to that point? Okay, so basically it gives you the strength of the field. Electric field gives you the strength of the force exerted by the source charges. Mathematically, the electric field, now this was the physical definition and the mathematical expression. Since F equal to Q into E, so the electric field at that point is defined as the limit of the ratio between the force on a test charge placed at that point to the test charge as the magnitude of the test charge approaches 0. Now what does that mean? This. E is equal to limit Q tends to 0 F by Q. This is the mathematical definition of the electric field. You gradually decrease the magnitude of Q, make it tend to 0, and that in the limiting condition F by Q will give you the value of the electric field at that point. Okay, force on a test charge placed at that point. What is the unit of E? Very easy to find out the unit of E. F F equal to QE, so E equal to F by Q, force by charge. So in the SI system, it is Newton by Coulomb, and in the CGS system, it is dyne by electrostatic unit of charge. You know the CGS unit of charge is 1 ESU of charge. So in the SI system, the unit of E is Newton by Coulomb and Newton per Coulomb, and in the CGS system, it is dyne per ESU of charge. Dimension of E. This is a question that often comes in the exam. Okay, you have to find out the dimension of E. Newton by Coulomb. Now Newton means force, which is mass into acceleration, and Coulomb means current into time. We know current equal to charge by time, so current equal to Coulomb by time, so Coulomb equal to ampere into time. So mass in the MKS or SI unit, mass is kg, acceleration is meter per second square. So the numerator is kg meter per second square, and the denominator is current into time, so ampere into second. So now you can write the dimension of E, m for kg, L for meter. We have second to the power minus 2 and again a second in the denominator, so second to the power minus 3, so time to the power minus 3, and ampere in the denominator, so I to the power minus 1. So what is the dimension of E? M, L, T to the power minus 3, I to the power minus 1. This is a very, very important expression, and if you check your question papers, you will see that this has been repeated several times. You are often asked to find out the dimension of the electric field. Very easy to find out. You just have to follow this. Okay. Now, how do we see the electric field? We saw what an electric field physically means. We saw how to mathematically express the electric field. We saw from the expression of the electric field what is the unit of electric field. We saw what its dimension is. Now we have to figure out whether we can actually see, observe an electric field. There are several test charges, or there is a single test charge or a single source charge, and we want to visualize the electric field due to these charges. Is it will at all? So the visualization of an electric field E is possible using the electric lines of force. I guess all of you have heard about the lines of force, electric lines of force, magnetic lines of force. Now, what is the definition of a line of force? This is exactly the definition that you will write if you are asked to write down if you are asked to define an electric line of force. A line of force is an imaginary line or curve such that the tangent at any point gives the direction of the electric field at that point. Now you know that electric field is dependent on distance. So the value of the electric field will change with distance. It also depends on the unit vector r. So its direction will also change as r changes direction. Okay, so as you move away from a charge or as you move towards a charge, the tangent to an imaginary line that will give you the direction of the electric field at that particular point, that is called the electric line of force. Okay. So what are the primary, now in books you will get several 5-6 properties of electric lines of force. But what are the two primary properties of electric lines of force that you must know? If you are asked to write down the properties of electric lines of force in the examination, you will be given maximum 2 marks. So you have to write down the two most important points. What are they? First, they always start from positive charges and they always terminate on negative charges. An electric line of force will always start from a positive charge and will always terminate on a negative charge. Okay. And second, two lines of force may never intersect. This is very important. You will never have two lines of force due to a single charge that can intersect each other. Why? Because if they intersect, then the point of intersection would indicate the presence of two directions of the electric field. At the point of intersection of two lines, there will be two tangents. So at a single point, two tangents indicate two directions, which is impossible. Okay, so intersection would indicate presence of two directions of the electric field at a single point, which is impossible, which is why two electric lines of force will never intersect. Okay. So basically, this is the visualization. This is a positive charge, and you can see electric lines of force are coming out. This is a point charge. So basically, you have lines of force moving in all directions, radially outwards. Okay, so it's a spherical direction. And if you have a negative charge, then the lines of force will come and terminate on it. So they emanate from positive charges and terminate on negative charges. So from a positive charge, they come out, and on a negative charge, they come and terminate. Okay? And on any such line of force, if you draw the tangent, you'll get the direction of the field at that point. If you have, these are two separate charges. If you have two charges close together, see, if you have a positive and a negative charge, then the lines of force will start from the positive charge and go and terminate on the negative charge. Okay. Now these have properties of an elastic thread. So what will happen? They will try to bring the two charges closer. So unlike charges attract. Whereas if you have two like charges, then I've given you the picture of two positive charges that are close together. So from both the charges, the electric lines of force come out and go towards infinity. So they will never meet. So they will be repelling each other. So using electric lines of force too, you can explain why like charges repel and unlike charges attract. Okay. I'll just end the class today with two example problems, and after that I have something else to tell you. So our first, I hope all of you have got I suppose from your class 12 boards knowledge, you have already a concept of electric field. I just sort of built on it, gave you a little more insight into the concept of electric field. Okay, I hope it was understandable. I'll just show you two example problems, very simple. First is this: two unknown point charges are placed d distance apart. The field strength is 0 at a point P between them on the line joining them. So if the distance of P from one of the charges is x, find the ratio of the charges and also their nature. This is a very simple problem. You just need to draw the figure first. So we have two charges, say Q1 and Q2, d distance apart, and we have a point P between them. We don't know where it is. Distance of P from one of the charges is x. So let us suppose its distance from Q1 is x, and therefore from distance from Q2 is d minus x. Now according to the problem, the field is 0 at the point P. You have to just here, you have to use the expression of electric field. So what is the electric field at P? Q1 by 4 pi epsilon naught x square. And the expression of electric field due to Q2 at P is Q2 by 4 pi epsilon naught d minus x whole square. So according to the problem, the field is 0 at P means these two values must be equal. They neutralize each other at P. Okay, so we have Q1 by 4 pi epsilon naught x square equal to Q2 by 4 pi epsilon naught d minus x whole square. So you have been asked to find the ratio. So Q2 by Q1 equal to d minus x whole square by x square. Value of x has not been given, so you can keep your answer like this. And you have been asked to find the nature of the charges. How will you find the nature of the charges? Whether they are of the same sign or of opposite sign. See, since d is greater than x, so you can see that d minus x by x is a positive quantity. So Q2 by Q1 is a positive quantity, which means that the charges have the same sign. Okay, so this is how you determine the nature of the charges. One problem. Our next problem, again a very easy problem, just a different type. It says two protons, each of mass
Ma'am,
1. Yes, yes.
why we have equated Q1 and Q2?
Because it says that the field at P is 0. So the field at P will be 0 only if the two forces equalize each other. They are neutralizing. The two forces, the two fields are neutralizing each other. There is no charge at P, right? So Q1 and Q2 are exerting a force on each other. That you can find out by the expression of Coulomb's law. But here they say that the field at P is 0. See, this will be clear if we go to this picture. See, two like charges. Can you see two like charges? So field lines will come out from them. Okay, either if they are negative, both negative, they will come and terminate. If they are both positive, field lines will come out. So in between somewhere there will be a point which is called the neutral point, where there will be no field. The fields due to these two charges neutralize each other. They are equal at that point, which means that at that particular point the field is neutral. Okay, so which is why that point, that neutral point, is where the fields due to the two charges are equal to each other, which is why we have equated the expressions of the two fields. Clear?
So ma'am, both charges should be same.
Yes, both charges are same. They are repelling each other. That is why there is a point where they neutralize each other.
Okay ma'am.
Okay. They are in the ratio d minus x by x whole square. When they are in the ratio d minus x by x whole square, that is when they can neutralize each other at such a point P. And this is happening because the two charges are of same sign. Otherwise, they would attract each other. Then you would not find a point of zero field if they would attract each other. Okay. If they would be of opposite signs, then this would not happen. Just because they are of same sign, they are repelling each other. That is why you find a point of neutralization on the line joining the two charges. Okay. Next problem is two protons, again two like charges, each of mass 1.5 into 10 to the power minus 27 kg, this is the mass of a proton, are placed r distance apart. If repulsive force is equal to weight, calculate r. Okay. So this is again a very simple problem, just a bit of numbers involved. So according to the problem, the repulsive force, what is the repulsive force between the two protons? Both are protons, so same charge. So Q squared by 4 pi epsilon naught r square. And they say that the repulsive force is equal to the weight. Weight is mg, where m is the mass of the proton. Alright. So r will be given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q square by mg whole to the power half. That is the value of r that you get from this expression. So 9 into 10 to the power 9 is the value of 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught. Okay. This constant 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught, you can find out that its value is 9 into 10 to the power 9. Okay, and m is given 1.5 into 10 to the power minus 27, g is 9.8, and since we have q square to the power half, so we take q outside. So the value of q for proton and electron are the same, you know that, 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19. So if you use a calculator, you will see that the value of r comes out to be this. Okay, so this is the answer. So when the two protons are at such a distance, it is then that the repulsive force acting between them will be equal to the force, equal to the weight of each, the gravitational weight of each, mg, at this distance, so and so meters. Okay? This is again a typical kind of problem. There are several other kinds of problem. You can understand it is not possible for me to discuss all kinds of problems in class, but you can always go through the question papers, and if you see that you are not being able to do some kind of problem, you can send that to me and I'll try to solve it. Okay, so I'll end my discussion today here, and I'll